Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl. Today I'm joined by Dr. Ashley Seidel Potvin, who's an educator, researcher, and change maker whose work lives right at the intersection between compassion and education. Ashley is a research associate at the Renée Crown Wellness Institute at the University of Colorado, Boulder, where she partners with educators to cultivate more compassionate, dignified school communities. She's a former classroom teacher, a published academic, and now the lead author on a truly remarkable book, Creating Compassionate Change in School Communities, leading together to address everyday suffering in schools. The book brings together a dream team of authors, William Penule, Sonia Dimogen, and Thupten Jinpa, to offer a philosophical and practical guide to fostering compassion in schools, from the inside out. And in our conversation today, Ashley offers something special, a clear-eyed, heartfelt look at what it really takes to shift a school culture, from attuning to suffering, to making space for self-compassion, to leading collective change. Whether you're a teacher, a parent, or just someone who cares about the next generation, this is a conversation you won't want to miss. And so I bring you Dr. Ashley Seidel Potvin. Dr. Ashley Seidel Potvin, welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, Stan.
Yeah, great. Excellent. You were the lead author on the new book, Creating Compassionate Change in School Communities, with the subtitle Leading Together to Address Everyday Suffering in Schools. And I suppose the book opens really with an invitation to kind of pause, to attune to our own experience. And I wondered if we could start there. What led you to begin there, and what is it about creating or cultivating awareness, I suppose, in educators and just ourselves generally, really, and that lays the foundation for compassionate change?
Yeah, it's a great question. The book really focuses both on how educators can cultivate compassion within themselves and then lead together to create dignity affirming, humanizing school environments. We really believe that school change is an inside out job and that really important to begin with those inner resources. We all have them available to us, and we can cultivate and strengthen them. So I think that's where the pausing to attune to our own experience is really important. We draw on a definition of compassion from science and contemplative wisdom that talks about compassion being the kind of a four-part definition: an awareness of suffering, so that's the attunement, feeling moved by suffering, so that's the empathy component, a desire or a motivation to see the relief of that suffering, and then a willingness to act. So there's that action component. So when we think about those pieces of compassion, really building that awareness and that attunement of our own experiences can be really important. Getting to know ourselves, our inner habits and contours of the heart and mind is really important. Honestly, I think it's countercultural in schools. It's so different than the way that the school day is structured and set up, especially if you think about from the educator experience, the many interactions, oftentimes micro and quick interactions they have, the kind of bell to bell schedule of the day, that sense of pausing and checking in with ourselves. Um, it doesn't happen very often. There aren't a lot of invitations to do that. So really helping educators who are oriented towards caring for other people to pause and really tap into their own experience, I think is really important and can help them to offer compassion skillfully to others, to themselves, and also to find moments of joy tucked into the corners of those busy days. So we really do start with an invitation to notice those small moments too that bring you joy. I'll
Mm.
also mention that, um, on a practical level, we start there in the book because the book is really inspired and written by we developed a 4-course digital certificate in collaboration with educators, with researchers, with our co-authors, including Jimpa at the Compassion Institute. And it's a digital certificate that's available to educators master's level around cultivating compassion and dignity for self and others. And we offer that through the University of Colorado Boulder, through the teacher leadership program. And so the sequence of the book really follows the sequence of the course that we really thoughtfully designed with our partners and our co-designers there. So on a practical note, that's also another reason that we're starting where we start.
Mm. It's almost sort of countercultural in the world, isn't it? That idea of pausing to attune to our own experiences, and school environments, I suppose, are very similar to that too. You know, that there's just so much going on. There's one thing after another. There's many distractions too, in a way, and it's and yet it really is a foundational piece. It is where you begin, because awareness, mindfulness, attunement, those are really foundational. Not just to the even to the definition, I guess, that you've provided there with compassion, but just to start to cultivate a compassionate approach. And I mean, what are some of the practical suggestions you offer in terms of really building that awareness?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, part of what we offer in the book are we have practices for educators. So, we have longer kind of meditation practices that they could use and integrate, at the start or at the end of their day. But we know that those are not feasible, as I mentioned, in the kind of the busyness of the day. So, we also offer these on the spot practices. So, for instance, one practice to pause to attune to our own experience is just kind of noticing in the moment, maybe choosing one thing that you do often, whether it's as you're like walking into the school and you're, pushing the school, the door open, or you're opening the door to your classroom, or, you're setting up your board for the day, or you're laying out materials as you're preparing for students. Just taking a moment to notice what am I feeling right now? Even as you're doing that, you don't have to stop the activity that you're doing, but just bringing some kind of awareness to what is it that I'm doing and how am I feeling right now? I'm preparing for my students to walk into the door. What is my internal experience? What am I noticing? At the end of the day, maybe it's the first time you're, as an educator, maybe the first time you're sitting down in your chair, you feel yourself sit in the seat. What am I feeling? What am I noticing? And it's just a really quick kind of pause and check in that we invite educators to do in that kind of
Mm.
initial chapter.
Mm. Yes, I really like that notion of uh, transitional moments.
Mhm.
Um, sorry, let me just. I heard something weird in my um, earbuds. Um, I really like that idea of, yeah, transitional moments. It's kind of like little moments that are almost part of the routine, and then connecting the awareness and attunement to that, and as you said, just
Yeah.
pushing that school gate open, or that the door to the teacher's office, or that moment that you finally get to sit at the end of the day, that we can start to really yeah, just connect those moments that are already there to this brief but kind of brief but frequent, connection with the here and now, I guess, in a sense. What is it that
Yeah.
makes you feel that the school community really is a kind of such a vital context for cultivating compassion?
I think that's a great question. I think, I think when we talk with teachers, and I'm a former classroom teacher myself,
Ah,
so
yeah.
a lot of these stories and experiences resonate deeply with me. And I know that same with, the colleagues who I had. Um, Teaching and being an educator is such an amazing career and an amazing kind of pathway of helping people. And we know that educators enter into teaching or leading or counseling or whatever kind of role they're taking on in their school with these really beautiful intentions of, wanting to work in their communities, give back, work with students, whatever that might be. And we know that it's difficult. There are challenges. So it's both like a joyful and rewarding experience, and there are a lot of kind of emotional kind of facets of that role that sometimes you step into and you don't feel fully prepared for all of the things that come with what it means to be a teacher and to hold this kind of, container for your classroom or in your school. We also know that there are moments of suffering for students in schools. They can be really wonderful, joyful places for students as well, and sites of learning and sites of creativity and curiosity. And and sites of difficulty. There
Mm,
can be these moments of suffering. And so I think thinking about the opportunities for compassion and what we're really talking about is building connection, building community, having the resources to do that, to recognize that we have the resources to work together to create a community where students and youth can really thrive, where educators can thrive and flourish, I think is really important.
mm. It's I like how it's the both end, isn't it? It is a place
Mhm.
of joy and growth and learning and friendship potentially and all sorts of things, and
Absolutely.
it can be a place where things get tricky and it can be complex and various I guess various forms of suffering can become a part of it too. And the subtitle of the book
Yeah.
is Leading Together to Address Everyday Suffering in Schools. And one of the
Yeah.
chapters there, getting close to suffering in our schools. It's such a powerful idea. It's a very validating notion for educators, I suspect, to really to be seen, to actually have that as part of their role and part of their experience. And you alluded to a couple of things there, but what would you say are some of the everyday forms of suffering really that educators or students might be experiencing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'd say, I'll give like broad strokes, and it really depends. And but what we're seeing in our research and in our conversations, and what I know deeply, is that educators experience suffering when they don't feel seen and valued. And we hear that over and over again in our research, where, when they're in contexts where they feel that they don't have a say in policies or routines, or, the way that the school is perhaps structured or run. We are hearing again and again that there is suffering when the demands on educators are increasing without feeling like anything is really being removed from the plate. So, um, and educators often hold themselves to really high standards and expectations, or they feel also that the school or or wherever their district or organization is holding them to those high expectations, and they have these increased demands and they can't possibly do it all well. That causes some suffering. And then, the educators who find their way to our programs, to our work, are often like very deeply feeling. They care very deeply about their students. And so they're privy to a lot of their students' stories of pain and suffering, and they're holding those too, perhaps while navigating their own pain and suffering. And there's often not a place in schools for educators to address their stress, their overwhelm, their grief, their loss, whatever they might also be holding and navigating. So, those are some of the forms of everyday suffering that
Mm.
we tend to hear from educators. And then I think you asked about students, and I'd say, from the student perspective, and we're seeing this, in different research that's out there now too, is that students are reporting feeling more isolated, reporting feeling more alone, that their identities are not seen or valued in the classroom or school sometimes, really depending on where they sit in those kinds of social locations. So the suffering for educators and students too can vary, depending upon like race and gender and class and disability status and sexual identity, language, and for people who sit at multiple social locations, they might experience greater suffering. So some of those forms of everyday suffering with students, feeling that
Mm.
they don't belong, that they're not included, or that part of their identity is invisible, or they're feeling left out. So these are some of the kind of forms of everyday suffering that we might be seeing in schools.
Yeah, there are some that are in a way specific to the context or the system, and the kind of the demands, the stresses and demands kind of sometimes outweighing the resources and so on. And then there's more personal kind of sources of suffering that might even be a part of the educator's work, or it might be part of their life more generally. And it's not like things stop when you walk in the schoolyard, and same for the students too.
That's right.
There are social, uh, much wider kind of sources of suffering that can sort of infiltrate or be a part of the school experience for everybody. And so it's yeah, it can be very difficult to then also try to do the learning thing, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think when you are navigating those challenges, and when you don't feel seen or heard for whatever reason, or you are suffering and nobody notices, I think that can add to it too, and that can make it really hard
Mm,
to um, to feel that you can learn and grow and really, be the best version of yourself in a space, whether you're
mm,
an educator or a student. And I really think that the tools and practices of compassion, you know, can allow you and support you, especially as an educator, to get close to suffering without really getting stuck in that suffering. I think it gives
mm,
us, we talk about suffering and pain, but the other side of that is that there's also hope. There's a way forward, in a sense that I have these resources, and I also know how to engage these resources in my community. I can find support. We can work together to address some of these aspects.
mm. Yes, in many teachers and educators, I mean, they already have their heart in the right place, so to speak. You know, as you
Yeah,
said before, they really want to. It's a kind of a helping profession. It's a sort of a compassionate motivation in a way, just to be a teacher, and yet that can be tricky as well. And there's sort of burnout, I suppose, that people can face. Chapter 5 really explores empathy and compassion, I suppose, and sometimes the two ideas can be sort of conflated, and you spoke too in the book about, empathic care versus empathic distress. Could you share us a little bit about the distinction there between, I suppose, the different kind of empathy, but also empathy and compassion?
Yeah. So, empathy, I shared the definition that we use of compassion, and empathy
Yes.
is a really key component in what it means to be compassion. So that sense of, I feel moved by your suffering. I feel that. I feel that with you. And the distinction there is that, and we want to be really careful to say, like, empathy's not a bad thing at all. It's an important part of compassion, but where they differ is that with compassion, there's really an orientation towards action. And I think that for our educators is even just learning the kind of the difference between empathy and compassion, that you can feel, and it's not just stopping there with the feeling. And because what happens with the kind of what you were talking about with the empathic distress is that we can get stuck in those feelings, and it can start to feel overwhelming. And that's where the fatigue, what we might call empathy fatigue, comes into play, where we are just kind of like stuck in those feelings, whether it's our own or we're really like taking it on, like others kinds of feelings. And I can really relate to that as a former teacher, and hearing student stories and bringing them home with me and worrying about them at night, and feeling like, oh my goodness, what can I do? And I think compassion offers us a way forward to think about, we're not talking about solving or fixing things necessarily. We're talking about what is something that I can do to alleviate a little bit of that suffering. How can I show up for another person, for my student, in a way that is helpful and beneficial and skillful, in a way that would be meaningful to them? And sometimes that's just even acknowledging, wow, you're going through a really hard time. I see you. So we're not fixing the thing for them, but we are saying, we are here. We see you. We recognize you. And that's really pretty dignity affirming too, to say that, I can see your experience and I'm not afraid of it. That's the getting close to it again, right? Like, I can get close to it. I can be here with you. I can recognize that you're going through a hard time, and I'm not going to get kind of pulled down into that either. Like, we can be here together and we'll get through it together in that way.
Yeah, there's awareness is something of the foundation, and then empathy is like a skill that we then bring to that moment, and that ability to sort of resonate and take the perspective of others and so on. But it doesn't stop there either. It goes on to the intention and motivation and action piece, and it's all together. It creates something more like compassion. The difficulty, we want to have some of that empathic care or concern, because that kind of helps to motivate the compassionate action. The difficulty is when it does become more like emotional distress, and that can sometimes motivate us away from compassionate action or away from the suffering. And as you say, that it's really a powerful thought that really the compassionate action itself might just be staying present with the person, and listening, and empathizing, and validating, and helping them to feel seen and valued, and that in and of itself is something that we can do. I suppose sometimes
Yeah.
systems make it hard to be able to respond in a helpful action kind of way. even though we are empathizing. That can be sometimes a dilemma.
Yeah, I think so. And what I was gonna say, I think I started to say this, but I just wanted to come back to it, is that understanding this kind of distinction between empathy and compassion. We've had educators tell us like that was an aha moment.
Yeah.
That actually like made that like opened up possibilities for me where before I would just get really like bogged down because everything felt so hard and so challenging. And how can I possibly, you know, fix everything that is going wrong kind of around me, or that all of the, the challenge or pain or suffering. And it kind of shifted their perspective. And we've heard this from multiple educators who've told us like just knowing the difference actually helped me to like take the next step to say, I don't actually need to feel overwhelmed. There's something that I can do that will bring benefit to somebody else, to my students, and it also brings benefit to me. I think that's the interesting thing about compassion, right? It it
Yes.
it can be very, caring and kind of offering it to other people, but in doing that, there's some benefit here for us as well.
Yes. And in fact, part two, I think, starts to talk about self-compassion as a
Yeah.
kind of a preparation for all of this, and for a preparation for even a kind of justice-oriented action that one might take. And sometimes people sort of misinterpret, I think, don't they? Or mistake self-compassion for something softer or more inward or more self-indulgent. But yeah, it sounds from reading the book that it's kind of key as well in preparing us for these other sorts of things. Can you talk about that? The sort of, it's that inside out thing that you mentioned from the start, I
Yeah.
think. But yeah, the inner care and that outer courage to act.
Yes. So I'd say this is a key part of the book, the part two on self-compassion, and it's always a pivotal component of our programs for educators. This idea that justice-oriented action, compassionate change requires kind of the inner resources and the outer courage, and kind of the collective courage as well. Um, and I think that self-compassion can help us to also be courageous in our advocacy, in our action. And we're talking about offering that same sense of kindness and care and patience to ourselves that we often offer, especially as educators. We offer that to students, to our colleagues, to people all day long. And I think this can help us. This is like another way that I think we can move beyond that sense of burnout and overwhelm and fatigue towards hope and action. And that it's just this idea that by taking care of ourselves, we can show up more resourced and better prepared to more skillfully take care of others, to essentially do our jobs and do them well. And we have, one educator told us, and he's been an educator for, I don't know, 15, 20 years. And he said that when he went through the program and he learned about self-compassion, that it was shocking and surprising. Those were the actual words, shocking and surprising to learn that caring for myself helped me to care for other people.
Mm,
And I think he was not just talking about it at an intellectual level. He was talking about, really deeply engaging with the practices and doing this work helped sustain him to continue to show up even when there were, challenges, and especially when there were challenges,
mm,
that it's okay to care for myself. And actually, it's, as you said, it's courageous
mm,
to say, wait a minute, I need to take a pause. I need to find some stillness or some quiet or connect with my community, connect with my loved ones. I need to do something to nourish myself so
Mm.
that I feel that I have the inner resources to navigate anything, whatever comes up, whatever is unexpected.
Mm.
Um, and there, to just share another story, we had a teacher, a high school teacher, who similarly felt impacted by these self-compassion practices. And, just even talking about self-compassion was so different and new for her that she said, I really started to practice self-compassion and realize I needed it. I really needed it. And it changed the way I related to my students. I noticed, for instance, a student was sharing a challenge that they were experiencing, and I noticed I could recognize that this student could use some self-compassion. And so I asked her, what are you doing to care for yourself? Like, what a beautiful question to ask a
Mm.
student. How
Yes.
often do we do that? So, I think offering ourselves compassion, it's not selfish, it's not
Yes.
indulgent, it's not soft. We're not talking about, um, like taking 3 weeks off, although like maybe that's what you need. I don't know. But just finding ways to care for ourselves so that we can do that kind of justice-oriented work, especially when we're working towards something that also impacts us.
Mm.
It can be really important.
It's so curious, isn't it, that it was received as just really new and shocking and surprising for teachers because
Yes.
yeah, they are such compassionate people and yet often flowing outwards, I suppose. That they're kind of compassionate towards others. What sorts of reservations do teachers or educators sometimes, quite apart from it being a surprise, do
Mhm.
you get much pushback on the idea of self-compassion, or do they worry about what self-compassion is, or whether they should do it or deserve it? What have you noticed there?
Yes, there is a little, sometimes uh, we hear I'm that they don't feel that they deserve it. That is something that people will share with us. And so we actually pair the conversation with self-compassion with also recognizing our own dignity. So we bring that in that, this idea that we all have inherent worth and value, and that there are things that we can do to affirm or deny dignity for ourselves and for other people. And so we really encourage educators and help them to see that actually like you have dignity, and as a human, you deserve care and compassion too, and you deserve to not only receive that from other people, but receive it from yourself. I also think there's like a little bit of fear that if I offer myself compassion, then I'm somehow not holding myself to a high enough standard. Like if I
Mm.
make a mistake, that I should beat myself up over that mistake. Like that's how I learn, like these are kind of things that we pick up along the way, and we're kind of taught maybe
Yes.
indirectly that we have to be hard on ourselves to like be better, to do more, and actually breaking that down a little bit and saying we can still hold ourselves to a high standard. We could still do for other people. And in fact, we can do that better when we are kind and caring to ourselves. It doesn't mean we let ourselves off the hook when we make a mistake or we experience a setback. We can still bring curiosity to that and learn from it. But we don't need to ruminate and to beat ourselves up and to, carry these kinds of negative scripts,
Mm.
or tell ourselves whatever we, like, that, oh, how could I be so stupid as to do that? Or I can't believe I did that. And to hold that and to repeat it often. I mean, the things we say to ourselves often, we would never think about saying that to a student, for instance. Like
Yes. Yeah.
that would be that would be shocking to say that out loud to a student, but yet it's okay to say to ourselves. So I think also that's where, for me, that's also where that courage happens, to
Mm.
say, wait a minute, I'm going to actually disrupt that kind of negative thinking or that negative talk, and it's hard.
Mm. Yeah.
It can be really hard. So I think that's where we get some resistance from people too, because it's hard work that
Mm.
requires courage. Yeah.
Yeah. They're sort of so focused on helping others that they feel like they might not deserve their own compassion, but then there's this other piece where people just hold tightly to self-criticism. They feel like it's the way to keep going and to improve and to not slacken off and so on
Yeah.
but there's that sort of we know if we're wanting to try to support or be helpful to others, we would never say to them what we sometimes say to ourselves. But another little thought, and I can't quite remember, does your book address the notion of being open to receiving compassion from others? For example, teachers exploring the idea of when other teachers come to them and say, "Oh, you've had a rough day today. Can I help or whatever?" Do you talk about that flow of compassion?
That's a great question. We don't talk as much in the book about receiving compassion, although we do talk about it in our programs, and our courses with educators, and really thinking about, what does it look like to receive compassion. I think we address it a little bit more in the sense of, what does it mean to be part of a community that is compassionate? And how do we ask for help when we need it? And sometimes that's self-compassion. So we talk about it
I
kind of
see.
in
Yeah.
relationship to these other kinds of components, I would say. And we have stories of educators who talk about, how great it was to be part of our course community, for instance, where they received a lot of benefit and compassion from other educators in the course as they were kind of learning and growing and thinking about, how do I do this kind of like justice-oriented, compassionate change in my school, and those kinds of
Mm.
areas.
Yeah, it is. You used the word disruption, I think, before, and it is a bit like that, isn't it? It really is kind of changing things up, and you did go on to talk in the book about the importance of seeing the system really as part of preparing. I get, and you're sort of referring to that there. This kind of
Mhm.
collective, compassionate action that starts to just flow, I suppose, amongst people and throughout the system. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, what are your thoughts there? How do educators develop that more systems level awareness or that collective compassionate action level of awareness?
Yeah, so we talk about this really in the last section. Part 4 of the book is really focused on that systems level awareness, which I think is a little bit of a new offering that we're bringing to the
Great,
kind
yeah.
of contemplative education and compassion space for educators. We're pairing it with this kind of systems level approach where, and I think what it does, so a systems level approach helps us to see both how suffering is experienced by groups of people widely and equitably across our schools, but also it helps us to see where there are opportunities to work together collectively to alleviate that suffering at a level that's bigger than just relying on like one person or an interaction. And so the way that we start to talk about that with educators, because sometimes that is a tricky turn for educators who are kind of focused, especially if we're thinking about teachers focused in their classrooms on their
Mm.
interactions with students. So we talk about these different dimensions of suffering. So we talk about intrapersonal, so the kind of emotional and thinking and internal experiences of suffering. We talk about the interpersonal, so those experiences of suffering that happen within relationship, oftentimes, through some kind of conflict. And then we talk about it at the community level, and there we're really talking about policies, practices, expectations, routines that contribute or cause some kind of suffering.
Mm.
And so by offering kind of these three dimensions, it's not that those three dimensions are separate or that they show up separately. Oftentimes they're kind of intertwined and at like all three of those aspects of suffering might be there, but by isolating them and looking at them through these kind of different levels or lenses, it helps educators to start to see and think at this systems level,
Mm.
especially when we're talking about like practices, policies, and routines. It moves us away from thinking about suffering being caused by, like one individual person, and rather like what's happening in the organization that might be causing suffering. So, for instance, are there like discipline policies we know often cause suffering, or is there something around the grading practices or routines that we have built into our school um, that are causing suffering, or maybe just like aren't helping, uh,
Mm.
suffering that's there. And so we start to kind of build towards thinking about that systems level change. The other way we talk about it, and this is kind of embedded in the title of like leading together, that this kind of systems level change requires more than just the action of one person. So it requires coordinated action where, we encourage educators to think about like who are your allies in this work? Who can you work together with to bring about this change that you see needs to be made? So that's another way that we start to help educators think about like what is a systems kind of um, change to
Mm.
make.
Mm. And compassion and compassionate action becoming part of the system in a way. It sort of integrates it
Yes.
in and at those various levels. And I'm not sure whether you said it exactly like this, but it's an interesting thought that suffering and noticing suffering is kind of offers us an opportunity in a way. It's still very difficult to have to go through the suffering, but it is an
Mhm.
opportunity for compassion and to try to work out and identify ways to be helpful and to sort of alleviate, I guess, that suffering. So thinking of it
Yeah.
in that with that curious, hopeful way. You've mentioned
Mhm.
hope a few times too, which I think is really important. Just that notion of hope and possibility and the curiosity, but the courage and
Mhm.
seeing these, bringing awareness in, empathizing, seeing the suffering, but as an opportunity for doing something differently. Um, you you
Yeah.
you kind of then talk it towards the end about, I guess, leadership or leading for compassionate change, and that notion of leadership, sort of runs through. What do you sort of what is this kind of courageous, fearless sort of leadership maybe look like in the context of creating such a compassionate schooling environment or system?
Yeah, I love this question. And I think, I want to say, like, when we talk about leadership in this way, we are talking about, we are not just talking about formal kind of leadership. So, there are many leaders in schools who hold those formal positions, whether it's some kind of a teacher leader position or a principal or, the head of a department. And so they certainly can be leaders. And we're also talking about leading in a more informal way. So a lot of times, especially teachers who come to us almost bristle a little bit at the term leader, like, I'm not a leader. And I think like we would say that anybody who is working to really bring these ideas and practices of compassion and dignity into their schools, to embody them, to model them, to find a pathway forward for a better, more humanizing school environment, is in fact a leader. And so I think you asked like what does leadership look like? I think it can look different in different ways, but I think one aspect of a leader is that um, they are uh, able to attune to suffering, to other people's experiences. They feel, to pull back the language that we were using earlier, they're able to get close to suffering. So there's that like courage part of, I'm not going to wither from this suffering. I have the resources. Um, and then they're able to, if they're not able to act, they're able to work with others in their school community to figure out who can help. So, we have instances of teachers saying, I had a student who had this really big challenge, and it was more than what I am trained to do. But I was able to figure out how to connect them to the resources and to the people who could help them. So I recognized the suffering, and I didn't leave it there, or I didn't say like, "Oh, I'm so overwhelmed." I said, I can do something. And that was making sure that that student got connected to the person and the resources that they needed in order to, um, feel seen and heard, and to feel well in that space.
Mm. Yes, there's courage, but there's also wisdom, I suppose, is now a little bit what you're describing there. The wisdom
Mhm.
to discern, is this a moment that I might address directly? Is this a moment where I might become a kind of a role model for others to also perhaps, kind of follow suit? Or is this a moment where I might coordinate something that happens with others kind of to really be helpful for this person and to be able to kind of, do those little calculations almost of what is likely to be most helpful or what's really needed in this moment.
Yeah, I think so. And I think when you talk about wisdom or discernment, we might also talk about skillful
Skillful.
action
Yeah.
or a skillful response. And that makes me think that there's also this sense within that I don't actually need to have the answer. It's okay to not have the answer or to be able to solve or fix. Um, and I think actually that takes courage.
Mm,
That I think is difficult for educators who, as part of our training, you're supposed to like be able to guide students and get up in front of a whole classroom of students and have the answers and be able to answer questions and know what to do and how to do it. And so there, I think sometimes that is a challenge to say, actually, you don't have to take all of that on. That um, compassionate leadership is done together. It's collective. It's not just about you. And that goes back to also that like systems level awareness that we can actually do more when we work together in a coordinated way.
mm. The
Hmm.
book has lots of activities and practices and so on, but one of my favorite ones was in this Leading for Compassionate Change chapter, developing compassionate personas, ally, neutral person, or opponent. Um, uh, would you be able to just sort of talk us through that little activity? How would that work for someone running through
Sure.
that?
So that activity actually comes towards the end of that
Mm,
fourth section when we're guiding people through thinking about how to plan for compassionate change in their schools. So at the point that you might use this persona, you've set an intention for alleviating some kind of social suffering, and you've gone through kind of a series of planning, seeing the system and coming up with an action plan. And so we developed these personas as a way to start to think about who in our system, who in our school might be an ally for this particular change idea that we have, who might be a neutral person or like a group of people who might be kind of neutral. That they're maybe like not on either side yet. And then who might actively oppose this idea. And the idea really is that we have a template that has like a series of questions where you think of somebody, or maybe it's like a few somebodies that you're kind of pulling together to do this persona, and thinking about what really motivates them. What are they interested in? What part of your change idea might resonate with them, or might they have questions about? So it's a way to both dig a little bit deeper into kind of the ideas that people have for instituting action, for bringing this kind of like leadership, so to speak, into fruition, but also as a way to honor that there are many different perspectives and groups of people in our school communities who we want to talk to and invite into. It doesn't mean that they're always going to be on board, but how can we think about them in a way, that is aligned with what we've been talking about, that's dignity affirming. Just because they oppose your plan or this group of people opposes your idea, doesn't make them bad people. There might be a really great reason why they're not on board with that idea. So really kind of trying to peel back the layers and think about like who are these people? What
mm,
motivates them? How could I talk with them? And this also, I'll just mention, it maps on to some of our meditation practices that we offer and introduce in earlier chapters, where, listeners might be familiar with these kinds of compassion practices where, we're broadening compassion and expanding our circle. So we offer compassion to a loved one, somebody who's dear to us. We offer compassion to a neutral person, somebody who we don't know very well, but who we see and recognize, and then somebody who's a little bit more difficult and pushes our buttons. So we have kind of these three kind of groups of people who we've been working with in practice. And so we kind of brought that framework into thinking about a persona and how we talk with people in our school community. So it's also possible that some of those allies, neutral people, and opponents who we're thinking about in our persona have come up in our practice.
yes, very
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you can, even in this one exercise, I was feeling that the four dimensions of compassion are in there. It's pausing and taking a moment to stop and be aware and attuned. It's empathizing and feeling moved by this other person and who they are and what their motivations are. It's about sort of setting intentions and feeling motivated to take actions. What else would I like to know about this person? What do I hope in terms of their involvement? And so even in that one little exercise, I felt like the you could sense the definition in a way of
Yeah.
compassion running through it.
Yeah, I think so. And personas are an exercise that's been adapted from like design thinking and design work.
Ah,
And we really like kind of built on that idea of a persona to really integrate. So I'm glad that you could see the kind of aspects of compassion in there to really think about how can we really humanize the people in our school communities, because it's really easy to just say like, oh, there's that whole group that they're not on board, and but really we're all part of this community, and we haven't talked about this yet, but like another element in the book is we talk about the sense of interdependence,
ah,
which I think is like also a really beautiful way to think about systems and the way, like the webs of connection and the ways that we're connected, and the ways our experience kind of impact one another and how we need one another. And so, yeah, this activity of developing we even call it developing compassionate personas is really meant to not only help people move their change forward, their change ideas forward, and to think about how to talk with other people, but really how to see the humanity in other people, even if those other people disagree with them. How do
mm,
we have those conversations?
mm.
So, mhm.
And wouldn't it be great to spread that throughout the world as well, I suppose?
Yes. Yes.
The book spans so much. I mean, it does it's sort of deeply philosophical and explores, human dignity and compassion, and yet in a very sort of in a way that really connects with the everyday experiences of teachers and students. And you've mentioned it brings together a pretty extraordinary group of contributors too. But I guess just for fun, I was curious. I mean, what was it like to lead this project and to sort of coordinate all of the authors and so on, and what did you learn through writing the book? I mean, there's
Yeah.
probably many things, but
So
yeah,
many things.
yeah.
Yes, so many things. I mean, I think I'll really answer that question by starting from the beginning. 6 years ago, we started working with a group of educators. I started working with my co-authors, members of our research team, members at the institute where I work, which is the Renée Crown Wellness Institute at the University of Colorado Boulder. We were working with contemplative experts, including Thupten Jinpa, the fourth author on this book. And all of those people came together to really think about and develop and co-design this digital course sequence that I
Mm,
spoke about. And so the journey really began there when we first came together, and we actually took for listeners who know the compassion cultivation training, CCT, we took that together as like a
oh,
foundational
yeah.
experience to then start to think about what is our four course sequence going to look like? What's the arc of it? And how are we going to make this really come alive and be relevant for educators to connect to their lived experience? So, starting there, it's just been such an honor to get to work with our educator team, our author team of Bill Penuel, Sona Demijan, and Thupten Jinpa, and all of our kind of research team who's been incredible. And I think for me, um, what's been really kind of inspiring and exciting is to see the ways that educators have taken up these ideas and practices. It's one of the reasons we wanted to write the book, because they really brought these ideas and practices in our courses to life. They integrated them in really interesting ways in their classrooms and their schools, thinking about these change ideas, made them their own. We've seen people, educators, move into leadership roles, formal and informal, in their schools. And also in our compassion and dignity community, we have some educators right now who are actually leading a virtual book study of this book. And so it's just been really inspiring to see the ways that educators have been working really towards a world, towards a school community where they and young people can thrive. And so for me, that's really been the gift, and just seeing that these practices are essential. People need them. People are asking for them. People who've gone through our course are saying, "Is there more? What else can I do?" And they're talking about how these practices are making a difference, actually, not only in their professional lives in their school communities, but we have lots of stories of educators who are like, who tell us, this is the only professional development I've gone through that I'm using at home. Like
Home.
I'm a better spouse, I'm a better parent, I'm a better friend, I'm a better, partner, whatever it might be. Um, so I think like these practices kind of move across those contexts, and that's been really meaningful to see.
Yeah.
So just this like sense of joy and hope from our educators, I think has been just amazing.
Well, it is a wonderful and truly helpful book. So, Dr. Ashley Seidel Potvin, thank you so much for bringing it to fruition. 6 years in the making and offering it to the world. But also, thank you very much for speaking with me on compassion in a t-shirt.
Yeah, thank you, Stan, for having me. It's been a real pleasure.